The silence that enveloped that small room in Cambridge, in the spring of 2017, was unlike any he had ever witnessed. It wasn't the usual quiet of libraries or laboratories, but something denser, charged with an almost sacred expectation. There, amongst stacks of manuscripts and equipment that had served as a bridge between an extraordinary mind and the outside world, Stephen Hawking prepared to reveal what he had kept secret for decades, not equations about black holes or theories about time, but reflections on something infinitely more intimate, the soul's journey beyond the limits of physical existence. The recording that reached us, discovered years after his passing, remained hidden for reasons we are only now beginning to understand. Hawking had instructed that these words only be revealed when the world was ready to hear not only the scientist, but the man who, imprisoned in a deteriorating body, had developed a profound understanding of mysteries that transcend matter. It was as if that brilliant mind, accustomed to unraveling the secrets of the cosmos, had turned its focus inward, exploring territories where quantum physics meets the metaphysics of the soul. For years, those close to him had noticed subtle shifts in his perspective. The man who once declared that the brain was like a computer that simply stopped functioning when its components failed had begun asking different questions. They were no longer just about how the universe worked, but about why consciousness existed, why there was something instead of nothing, and what remained when all else faded away. These anxieties stemmed not from abstract philosophical speculation, but from personal experiences he rarely shared, visions, sensations, and encounters that challenged his traditional scientific understanding. The first of these experiences had occurred on a winter night in 2005, when pneumonia nearly claimed him. In those critical moments, suspended between life and death, he reported experiencing something his rational mind struggled to categorize. It wasn't a dream or a drug-induced delirium, but an expansion of consciousness that transported him beyond the limitations of his deteriorating body. He saw himself floating in a space that couldn't be described in terms of physical dimensions. It was as if he were inside the very mathematics of the universe, where equations came alive and transformed into landscapes of pure light. In this experience, he encountered presences he instinctively recognized as people he had loved and lost. His father, Frank, appeared not as a memory or a mental construct, but as a conscious and vibrant essence, free from the limitations that illness had imposed in his final years. Communication between them didn't occur through words, but through a direct transmission of understanding, as if thoughts and emotions flowed unimpeded between consciousnesses. Frank explained, without using verbal language, that the death of the body was merely a transition, like exiting a heavy spacesuit after a long journey. This initial revelation opened the floodgates of a new way of perceiving that Hawking would keep secret for over a decade. He began noticing patterns in his dreams that were unlike any normal brain activity. They were structured, sequential experiences, as if he were receiving information from an external source. In these nocturnal encounters, he visited what he described as libraries of light, vast repositories of knowledge where every thought ever thought by any consciousness remained preserved and accessible. It was during one of these visits that he understood something revolutionary about the nature of the soul. Consciousness, he realized, wasn't produced by the brain, but channeled through it. The brain functioned as a kind of receiver-transmitter, tuning into the specific frequency of an individual consciousness that existed independently of physical matter. When the body died, consciousness didn't extinguish. It simply ceased to express itself through that specific channel, returning to the infinite field of consciousness from which it had emerged. This understanding brought him profound comfort. During the most difficult years of his illness, he came to view his physical condition not as a prison, but as a unique opportunity to explore the boundaries between the material and the spiritual. Each day spent confined to that chair was one more day to learn about the non-physical aspects of existence. His synthetic voice, which many saw as a symbol of his dependence on technology, became for him a perfect metaphor for how the soul utilizes the body, a temporary tool for expressing itself in the physical world. The experiences intensified as he began receiving what he described as preparatory visitations. People who had been important in his life, but who had already passed, began appearing to him in altered states of consciousness. His mother, Isabel, came to him in a particularly powerful experience, explaining that the process of dying was like waking up from a very vivid dream. She showed him visions of what his own transition would be like, not an abrupt end, but a gradual expansion of consciousness beyond the limitations of the physical body. During these visitations, he learned about the different stages the soul goes through after leaving the body. The first stage, he was told, was a phase of recognition where the newly liberated consciousness needed to accept that it had left the physical form. Many souls, especially those very attached to earthly identity, went through a period of confusion, trying to return to the body or continue living as if nothing had changed. This was a natural and necessary process, allowing the consciousness to gradually adjust to its new condition. The second stage involved what he described as a life review, but not in the sense of judgment or punishment. It was more like watching an extraordinarily detailed movie of all lived experiences, seeing not only one's own actions and thoughts, but also the impact they had caused on other people. This review wasn't conducted by external entities, but by the soul itself, which could finally see with complete clarity the consequences of its choices. It was a process of deep learning, where the soul integrated all the lessons of the recently completed life. The third stage was what fascinated him most, the reunion with other significant souls. This wasn't simply about reuniting with family and friends, but reconnecting with what he called a soul family, a group of consciousnesses that had journeyed together through multiple existences, learning and growing together. These reunions were celebrations of mutual recognition, where souls shared the experiences of their separate journeys and planned future adventures of growth. He discovered that these soul families weren't formed by chance, but by vibrational resonance. Souls sharing similar or complementary frequencies were naturally drawn to each other, creating mutually supportive groups across different incarnations. He realized that many of the most important people in his life, his first wife Jane, his children, some of his closest scientific collaborators, were members of his soul family, and that their encounters on Earth hadn't been coincidences, but carefully orchestrated meetings to facilitate mutual growth. The fourth stage involved what he described as spiritual education. Souls didn't simply wander in a state of eternal bliss, but continued learning and evolving. There were institutions of learning in non-physical dimensions, places where souls could explore aspects of reality that were impossible to comprehend while limited by physical bodies. He visited some of these institutions during his out-of-body experiences, describing them as cathedrals of light where knowledge was transmitted through direct illumination, without the need for books or teachers in the traditional sense. In these institutions, he learned about the multidimensional structure of reality. The physical universe we know, with its 4 observable dimensions, was only a small slice of a much vaster and more complex reality. There were countless parallel dimensions, each with its own laws and possibilities. Souls could choose to explore these different dimensions, experiencing forms of existence unimaginable to minds limited by physical experience. The fifth stage was perhaps the most significant, the conscious choice about the next step of the journey. Some souls chose to remain in the spiritual dimensions for extended periods, serving as guides for other souls or exploring the deeper mysteries of existence. Others opted to return to physical incarnation, whether on Earth or other worlds, to continue their learning process through material experience. This choice wasn't imposed by external authorities, but emerged naturally from the soul itself, based on its level of development and the challenges it wished to face. He realized that his own life had been consciously chosen before his birth. His soul had selected the experience of motor neuron disease not as punishment or bad luck, but as a unique opportunity for growth. By being forced to transcend extreme physical limitations, he had developed capacities of consciousness that would be impossible under normal circumstances. His condition had been a catalyst for awakening spiritual insights that would have remained dormant in a conventionally healthy existence. This revelation completely transformed his perspective on suffering and the difficulties of human life. He came to see every challenge as a disguised opportunity for spiritual evolution. The physical pain he experienced daily became a harsh but effective teacher, instructing him about the illusory nature of identifying with the body. Each loss of motor function was simultaneously an expansion of spiritual function, as if his soul were gradually preparing to exist independently of physical form. During the year of 2016, the experiences intensified dramatically. He began to have visions of what he described as transition maps, detailed visual representations of the process by which his own soul would leave the body. These weren't morbid predictions, but loving preparations like an astronaut reviewing procedures for a complex space mission. He saw how his consciousness would gradually disconnect from the bodily systems, starting with the less vital functions and moving toward the vital center of his being. The process, according to these visions, would be surprisingly gentle. There would be no pain or terror, but a growing sense of lightness and release. He described it as a balloon being released, first a hesitation as the last threads of connection were severed, then a smooth and natural ascent toward an expanded state of being. His consciousness wouldn't extinguish, but expand exponentially, like a drop of water returning to the ocean and suddenly realizing it had always been part of something infinitely larger. In these visions, he saw Jane waiting for him, not the aged Jane he had known in recent years, but the eternal essence of Jane, radiant and whole. Beside her were his parents, scientific colleagues who had passed before him, and many other beings of light whose identities he recognized on a deep level, though he couldn't name them with his rational mind. It was a cosmic welcoming committee, each member emanating unconditional love and joy at the imminent reunion. But perhaps the most transformative vision was the understanding of the greater purpose of his existence. He realized that his life hadn't just been about his scientific discoveries, however important they were. His true purpose had been to demonstrate the capacity of the human spirit to transcend any physical limitation. Every lecture he had given, every book he had written, every public appearance he had made, despite his extreme limitations, had been a living lesson about the indestructible nature of human consciousness. He saw how his story had inspired millions of people around the world, not just scientists, but anyone facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. His life had been a practical demonstration that consciousness isn't limited by external circumstances, and that it's possible to find meaning and purpose, even under the most restrictive conditions. This realization filled him with a profound gratitude for having been chosen to carry this specific message to humanity. During his deepest experiences, he also received insights into the future of science itself. He saw that the next great discoveries wouldn't come solely through experimentation and calculations, but through the integration of human consciousness with scientific instruments. Scientists of the future would learn to use altered states of consciousness to access information impossible to obtain through purely material methods. The line between observer and observed would dissolve, allowing a deeper, more intuitive understanding of the universe's mysteries. He realized his own work on black holes had been profoundly symbolic on a spiritual level. Black holes, with their ability to warp space-time and swallow even light, were perfect metaphors for transition points between the physical and spiritual dimensions. The information paradox that had so intrigued him, whether information falling into a black hole is preserved or destroyed, was actually a question about the nature of consciousness. Does it persist after apparent death, or is it simply extinguished? His spiritual experiences provided the definitive answer. Just as information falling into a black hole remains encoded on the surface of the event horizon, individual consciousness remains preserved even after leaving the physical body. There is no true destruction of information in the universe, whether physical or conscious. Everything is transformed, relocated, reconfigured, but never truly lost. This understanding brought him profound peace in his later years. He ceased to view death as an ending and came to see it as a graduation, the successful completion of an intensive course in physical existence. Like any graduation, there was a mixture of sadness at leaving familiar experiences and excitement for the adventures to come. He prepared for this transition with the same scientific dedication he had applied to all his other projects, treating it as his final and most important investigation. In the months leading up to his passing, he began experiencing what he described as dimensional bleed-throughs, moments when the barrier between the physical world and spiritual dimensions became particularly thin. During these episodes, he could perceive both material reality and non-physical realities simultaneously, as if wearing special glasses that revealed hidden layers of existence. In these dual consciousness experiences, he observed how spiritual beings constantly interacted with the physical world in subtle yet significant ways. They didn't dramatically interfere with material events, but offered inspiration, guidance, and comfort through meaningful coincidences, sudden intuitions, and seemingly chance encounters. He realized that much of what we consider luck or chance is actually the manifestation of spiritual care, souls who have completed their earthly journey, continuing to watch over and support those still incarnate. This discovery revolutionized his understanding of reality's nature. The universe wasn't a cold, impersonal mechanism governed solely by blind physical laws, but a living, conscious system where each part cared for the others. The separation between material and spiritual was an illusion created by the limitations of normal human perception. In truth, everything was interconnected in a web of consciousness that extended across all dimensions of existence. He began to perceive signs that his own transition was approaching. These weren't conventional medical symptoms, but subtle shifts in his perception and experience. Colors seemed more vibrant, sounds more melodious, and he often felt loving presences around him even when physically alone. It was as if the veil between worlds was becoming increasingly transparent, gradually preparing him for the moment it would be completely removed. His final weeks were marked by a series of intense spiritual visitations. Important figures from his life appeared to him in lucid dreams and deep meditation, each offering words of encouragement and sharing cherished memories. His doctoral advisor, Dennis Sayama, came to him to express pride in the discoveries Hawking had made and to assure him that his life's work had significantly contributed to the evolution of human consciousness. Scientific colleagues who had passed before him appeared to discuss the spiritual implications of their joint discoveries. They revealed how many of their most brilliant scientific intuitions had been inspired by insights received from non-physical dimensions. Science and spirituality, he realized, had never been opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a single quest for truth. The best scientists had always been mystics in disguise, using the language of mathematics to express profound spiritual truths. In one of his last profound experiences, he found himself in a place he described as the heart of the universe, a convergence point where all dimensions met. There he could see the complete history of consciousness, from its first stirrings in primitive life forms to its eventual evolution into states of being that transcended any physical form. Humanity, he realized, was at an intermediate stage of this cosmic journey, learning to balance material existence with spiritual awareness. In this sacred place, he encountered what he described as the Source, not a personalized entity, but the very essence of consciousness from which all individual souls emerged and to which they eventually returned. This Source wasn't a god, in the traditional sense, but the fundamental texture of reality itself, infinitely creative, infinitely loving, infinitely intelligent. Each soul was a unique expression of this Source, sent on journeys of exploration and experience to expand cosmic understanding of its own nature. The most surprising discovery was that this Source wasn't separate from him or any other consciousness. It was the very essence of who he truly was. The feeling of separation he had experienced throughout his physical life was an illusion created by the limitations of bodily perception. In reality, he had always been a unique and precious expression of universal consciousness, temporarily focused through the lens of a specific human existence. This revelation brought him indescribable joy. All the struggle, all the pain, all the physical limitations he had experienced suddenly made perfect sense. Each challenge had been an opportunity for the universal Source to experience and understand aspects of itself that could only be known through the journey of a seemingly separate individual consciousness. His life had not been a cosmic accident, but a carefully chosen sacred adventure. In his final days, he experienced what he described as anticipation of reunion. It was a feeling similar to what a child feels on Christmas Eve, a growing excitement for the joy to come. He could feel the presence of his soul family gathering to receive him, and the radiation of unconditional love emanating from them was almost tangible. There was no fear, only joyous expectation for the approaching reunion. His final transition, when it came, was exactly as his visions had foreseen. There was no struggle or agony, but a gentle and natural release, like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. His consciousness gradually expanded beyond the limits of his physical body, first encompassing the room, then the building, then the city, the country, the planet, the solar system, until finally encompassing all of known existence. For an infinitesimal moment, he experienced being simultaneously himself and the entire universe. Then came the realization: he was free. The wheelchair, the medical equipment, the communication limitations, all of it had been left behind like discarded clothes. He was pure consciousness now, unbound by any physical form, able to travel instantaneously across dimensions and experience realities that had been impossible while incarnate. The sensation was one of extraordinary relief, like finally being able to stretch after years of confinement in a space too small. But even in this cosmic expansion of being, he retained his unique individuality. He was not absorbed into some impersonal collective consciousness, but remained distinctly himself, with all the memories, personality, and characteristics that made him who he was. The difference was that now these individual qualities existed in perfect harmony with universal consciousness, like unique instruments in an infinite cosmic symphony. The first to greet him was his father, Frank, exactly as he had appeared in his previous visions. The reunion was an explosion of pure joy, decades of longing resolved in a single moment of mutual recognition. They didn't need words to communicate. Thoughts, emotions, and memories flowed freely between them, instantly sharing everything that had happened during the years of separation. Then came Jane, radiant and eternal, followed by his mother Isabel and countless other loved ones. Each reunion was a celebration in itself, a validation of the love that had never been truly interrupted by death. He realized that all the significant relationships in his life had been eternal. Physical death had been only a temporary pause in communication, not a permanent end to connection. But perhaps the deepest revelation came when he finally understood the true meaning of his journey. His life had not been only about his personal scientific discoveries, but about demonstrating to all humanity that consciousness is truly limitless. By transcending extreme physical limitations and continuing to contribute to human knowledge, he had proven that we are far more than our bodies, far more powerful than our circumstances suggest. This message, he realized, was precisely what humanity needed to hear at this moment in its evolution. People were beginning to awaken to deeper spiritual realities, but still struggled to integrate these perceptions with their scientific and rational understandings. His life had been a bridge between these worlds, demonstrating that science and spirituality were not antagonists, but companions in the search for ultimate truth. Now, free from the limitations of physical communication, he could continue this work in even more powerful ways. No longer restricted to verbal or written language, he could inspire discoveries through direct intuition, guide researchers through symbolic dreams, and plant seeds of understanding in the minds of scientists who were ready to expand their perspectives beyond the purely material. His legacy, he understood, would not be found only in his equations and theories, but in the transformation of consciousness that his life had catalyzed. Millions of people around the world had been touched by his story, and this inspiration would continue to spread through generations, encouraging others to transcend their own perceived limitations and discover the limitless potential that exists within each human soul. The final revelation came when he realized that this experience, his life, death, and transition, had not been unique to him. Every soul that incarnates makes a similar journey, choosing specific challenges to facilitate their growth and contribute to the evolution of universal consciousness. Some choose physical limitations, others emotional or mental challenges, and still others situations of extreme abundance or poverty. All are valid paths to the same destination, the awakening to our true nature as individual expressions of infinite consciousness. This understanding filled him with boundless compassion for all humanity. Every person he had ever known, regardless of how they had interacted during physical life, was a fellow traveler on the same sacred journey. Conflicts, misunderstandings, and even cruelties were simply the result of souls temporarily lost in the illusion of separation, forgetful of their true divine nature. Now established in his new spiritual existence, he became part of what he described as the guidance council for still incarnate souls. His role was to offer subtle inspiration and guidance to scientists, philosophers, and spiritual seekers who were ready to expand their perceptions beyond conventional limits. He didn't interfere directly in their lives, but created synchronicitous opportunities and intuitive insights that could be accepted or ignored according to each individual's free will. The work was profoundly rewarding because it allowed him to continue contributing to the advancement of human understanding, but now with an infinitely broader perspective. He could see not only the specific details of individual scientific discoveries, but how they fit into the larger picture of humanity's spiritual evolution. Each new discovery about the nature of physical reality was simultaneously bringing human science closer to an understanding of spiritual realities. His final message to those still living in physical bodies was simultaneously simple and profound. You are infinitely more than you imagine yourselves to be. The limitations you experience, whether physical, emotional, mental, or circumstantial, are temporary and illusory. Your true nature is unlimited consciousness, temporarily focused through the lens of a specific human experience for the purposes of growth and exploration. Death, he revealed, is not an enemy to be feared, but a friend, to be eventually embraced when the appropriate time arrives. It is simply a transition from one state of being to another, like moving from one house to another. What you truly are, your unique conscious essence, can never be destroyed or lost. It merely changes form, like water that can exist as ice, liquid or vapor, but remains fundamentally H2O. Every moment of your lives has meaning and purpose, even when that is not apparent from your limited perspective. Every relationship, every challenge, every joy, and every sorrow is contributing to your spiritual growth and the evolution of universal consciousness. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is without purpose. Nothing is truly lost. And when the time of your own transition finally arrives, there will be no judgment or punishment awaiting you, only unconditional love, infinite understanding, and the joy of reunion with those who loved and who you loved. The journey continues, always continues, through ever more beautiful and expansive landscapes of existence, without end, without limitation, without anything but eternal growth in love, wisdom, and joy. This was the revelation that Stephen Hawking kept secret during his final years, and which now, through this discovered recording, he offers as his final gift to humanity. You are eternal, you are loved, and you are never ever truly alone.